It ought to concern every person because it is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community because it tears at our social fabric. It ought to concern every business because it distorts markets. It ought to concern every nation because it endangers public health and fuels violence and organized crime. I'm talking about the injustice, the outrage of human trafficking.
The third highest grossing criminal enterprise behind the drugs and arms cartel, human trafficking represents $32 billion annually.
He had a very, very expensive suit and a private plane. You would never look at him and think, oh, well, this is a trafficker.
Although trafficking is criminal and can severely change the lives of those victimized, trafficking does and continues to exist due to the high demand for the cheap labor and services that it provides. Traffickers are driven mainly by the large profits they can reap from this industry, but they're also not deterred because ineffective punitive measures make their operations easy to get away with. It is through the use of force, fraud, and coercion that traffickers subject hundreds of people to involuntary servitude. There is no one profile for traffickers. It's commonly believed that traffickers are disguised as pimps, brothel owners, and fake massage business managers. And while this may be true, they can also be agriculture crew leaders and growers, labor brokers, and employers of domestic servants who traffic workers for their low-cost labor. Trafficking is very common and can be very subtle, so much that there have even been cases of people trafficked by their own family members.
Nobody would believe that you're a sex trafficking victim.
I think part of that is just because we've ingrained in ourselves of what a sex trafficking victim often is.
Victims of human trafficking are often individuals with low self-esteem who cannot protect themselves. In an attempt to create a better life for themselves and their families, they become vulnerable to false promises and end up submitting to the will of their captors. They are often kept out of sight to avoid being found, which makes them human slaves. There is a broad range of victims that are being trafficked. Those include those who are searching for employment, those who live in unstable homes, and those who have a history of sexual abuse. Among the most common trafficked are the undocumented immigrants, the runaway and homeless youth, and those who have been victims of trauma and abuse. Trafficking victims may be beaten, raped, or even killed for any reason, and children victims have high mortality rates due to the poor treatment they receive. Human trafficking often goes unreported because in many cases victims fear law enforcement, imprisonment, and public embarrassment. Traffickers also exert a great pressure on their victims to keep them controlled, sometimes drugging them, threatening their lives and that of their families, and manipulating them psychologically. In some cases, victims are not familiar with the language and culture of the different locations they are transported to, which keeps them from finding help.
Once you see how complex that escape can be, you start understanding why they're jumping. One woman in the film jumped from a building and sustained heavy physical injuries. When she woke up, Zhenya couldn't feel anything below her waist. She spent nearly a month in the hospital, but before she could receive surgery, the pimps were allowed to take her back to the brothel in Aksaray.
The psychological effects associated with being trafficked are extremely complex and can be short or long-term. Victims of human trafficking may exhibit one or a combination of various psychological disorders. If left unaddressed, these issues can be self-destructive and may even result in death. Trafficked victims most commonly suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and anger, to name a few. With post-traumatic stress disorder, a victim may recall events of the experience and fall into bouts of panic attacks and deep depression. Feelings of blame and unworthiness may also cloud the victim's mind, further placing them in a state of isolation. The feeling of love may also be misplaced, a characteristic of Stockholm Syndrome, in which the victim may experience a false bond with their captor or an abusive spouse in order to survive. Traffickers work mainly to exploit individuals by dehumanizing and objectifying them. In some cases, the psychological scarring is too intense to reverse and may even subject some to re-victimization.
Steps to reinstating psychological well-being include providing a safety network for victims and ensuring all their basic needs are met, attending to victims' physical and psychological well-being, searching for traces of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, substance abuse or dependence, depression and anxiety, and rebuilding their identity and self-esteem.
The Earth Charter is an international declaration of fundamental values with the purpose of building a just and peaceful global society. The first principle stresses the importance of respecting and caring for the community of life, which focuses on recognizing that every form of life has value, regardless of its worth to other human beings, and affirming faith in its inherent dignity. We chose this principle because we believe in the worth and value of human beings and the need for their rights to be respected, despite their current position in society. Humans deserve to be treated with dignity and should not be exploited. The Millennium Developmental Goals are 8 international goals that were established following the Millennium Summit of the United Nations in 2000. Goal 8, or the Global Partnership for Development, aims to develop further an open, rule-based, predictable, non-discriminatory trading and financial system. This includes a commitment to good governance, development and poverty reduction both nationally and internationally. This is important because it stresses both the need to have a profitable but non-exploitative industry while maintaining humanitarian principles.
Do we really need millions more victims in order to experience a true wake-up call? I really wonder. How many more 13-year-old girls, your daughter, my sister, our children need to be forced into prostitution?
It is barbaric and it is evil, and it has no place in a civilized world.